evening, everyone. Welcome to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. My name is Dawn Marie Schlegel, and I'm part of the community investment team here at Mars. While the good Dr. Redpath is enjoying some much-deserved sunshine this week for March break, I will be your introducer for the evening. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce you to Tammy Sturge to talk to you about a very important subject, the hiring and firing, and as well all of the human resources details you may need when starting your new businesses. Tammy is certainly a seasoned Entrepreneurship 101 speaker, returning for her 4th year at the podium. So from the very, very first time this course was ever run, Tammy's been part of our presentation. So a little background for you. Tammy provides human resources consulting in strategic planning, change management, executive coaching, training, and team building, among other consulting services. She spent 15 years as an executive with 2 of Canada's leading innovators. Tammy began her career at Procter & Gamble, where she spent 11 years in HR leadership roles, developing P&G's corporate training strategy and global performance management system. Some great outside of work-life stuff, where she belongs to the world's oldest book circle, an investment club for women called Sirens of Stock, which is one of the best names ever, I think. She runs marathons, practices yoga, and is an avid film buff. So please join me in welcoming Tammy Sturge.
And so I always find this very enjoyable for a couple of reasons, because I get to talk about human resources, which is obviously the area of expertise that I'm here to represent, but also I get to talk about it to entrepreneurs. And of course, I am an entrepreneur because my partner, my business partner, and I have an organization of ourselves, an office manager, and 4 consultants. So we are still very much in what I would call growth mode. It's slower growth now. For many good reasons, but yeah, we're still entrepreneurs, and we still make all of the same mistakes in HR for ourselves, despite being HR consultants. So we get to test out our own theories and find out they really do work or they don't work. So I'm going to, yeah, there we go. Thank you. So I always try to focus this presentation on what you really need to know. So not everything there is to know about HR, but what it is you need to know when you're in growth mode, when you're in startup mode as an entrepreneur. So here are some of the things. So for sure, how to hire and fire and how to manage, pay and manage people in between are usually very critical topics. Now, I also find that when I do this presentation, there are a lot of you who end up listening from an employee perspective, because there's a lot of topics here that may be of interest to you. So ask questions from either perspective. I'm fine with it. So this is what we're going to talk about. Hiring practices, compensation, performance appraisals, policy development, firing practices, and some related legislation. If there's anything that's not on here that you want to know about, we're going to be pretty informal, so just let me know what you want to talk. Here are some resources there are free resources online that you can go to, get tools, legislation, tips, techniques, etc. And so I think all your packages are now online, correct? So you can get all of this online. So hiring practices. Here's the biggest thing I see entrepreneurs not do. They actually don't sit down and write out what is the mandate of the job. And I'm less interested actually in the responsibilities that the job is going to have, because those are probably going to change over time anyway. But for sure, it makes sense to think about, and when I say think, I mean write down what it is that the job's about. And especially if you're working with someone else, so if you have a partner, if there's 2 of you or 3 of you and you are running a show, often in conversation, when you have to put it down on paper, what I notice is it doesn't end up being the same from one person's perspective to the other. And we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and we see them say, well, we talked about it over beer so many times, and we thought that we both wanted a CTO who could do X. Except one of them really wanted a CTO and the other one really wanted a CIO. They were both calling the person a CTO. And then when they started to talk about and write down, it looked different. So that's one of the things that's helpful. So when you're actually looking for that person, for sure, you may not be using Workopolis, which obviously costs money. There are many professional sites where you can post for free. There are, business schools, often your alumni. You can post to your alumni, and it doesn't cost you anything. And when I say send to your networks, I mean put it on Facebook, LinkedIn, absolutely. Any of the social networks are very good and free places to send out, a mini job description. You can send out a long one on those too, and we get a lot of responses from those. I don't know if you can Twitter one, but you could try. Better than doing nothing. And then, call people directly. So that's you've become your own headhunter, and you call up people that you know. Absolutely a good idea to do. And, just do a shout out on email. Anybody, send it out to people they're not interested in this job, but they might know someone. Here are the pitfalls. You hire someone because they want your job. And that may not seem like something right now in this economy that you would do, but this economy will pick up, and you will get to some point where you are desperate for somebody, and mostly entrepreneurs wait till they're desperate because they don't want to pay the money right off the bat for a salary. So they wait till they're desperate, and then when they're desperate, they make poor hiring decisions. And this is one of the things they do. They hire people for their pulse factor. So I used to work for Cyberplex back in the internet days, and Cyberplex was an internet company. And when I first got there, I found that we had 35% turnover. And when I did a scratch on the turnover, find out, what were the reasons for the turnover, we fired most people by the time they'd hit 6 months at the company, because we were so desperate and anxious to hire people fast. We didn't vet them properly, and we didn't notice the costs longer term outweighed the costs of waiting and hiring the right person. Second, hiring someone today who isn't going to fit into your organization tomorrow, and that might be your brother-in-law. And for sure, he'd make, a great VP of finance right now, because once he did his own bookkeeping for his backyard business, but 5 years from now, he really might not be your CFO, and now you can't fire him because he's your brother-in-law, and your sister would not be happy. So a lot of people get stuck in that kind of situation because they haven't thought it through from, what's it going to look like 5 years from now? Hiring someone as a contractor who's really an employee. And by the way, I suspect some of you may be in roles where you think of yourself as a contractor and you're really an employee. So this is how this works. You don't get to decide. It's Revenue Canada and the courts who make this decision. They decide what an employment-like relationship is. And it has implications for your remittances on CPP, EI, if you do fire somebody, on your severances, and on benefits. So people take their companies to court and say, you owe me these things. I wasn't really a contractor. I was an employee. And by the way, saying they're a contractor and writing them a job offer and a contract that says that they're a contractor, Revenue Canada does not care about that. What they're looking for is the symbols of an employment-like relationship. So, does the person work at your office every day? If so, they're probably an employee. Could be. It's a continuum, right? And Revenue Canada is going to look at how far you've got them along the continuum. Are they using your computer? Or do they bring their own computer in? Or do you cross-charge them for use of your computer? Those are some of the important things to ask about. Are they using the services of your admin assistant? Do they work full-time? In other words, they only work for you. They only have you as a client. So they don't work full-time, they work part-time, but you're their only client. Have they been with you for more than a year? A year is a really critical point for Revenue Canada to say, you've got an employee. That's not a contractor anymore. Are they paid through your payroll versus giving you an invoice? Are they paying GST? That's another thing that they look at. Are you providing the person with ongoing direction? So in other words, are you doing performance reviews for them, giving them, I would say, formal feedback? I mean, even a contractor, you're going to obviously give some kind of feedback and say, here's what I want you to do, but you expect that they know how to do it. If it's an employee, you're probably providing more coaching, more feedback, et cetera. So, if you have certain answers to these questions, and you can see which way it's going to go, congratulations, you don't have a contractor, you have an employee. And therefore, you could end up paying a lot of money that you don't want to pay. And the government will actually fine you, as well as make you pay for CPP, EI, et cetera, retroactively. They will also, they will punish you. Any questions about this, by the way? Okay. Please.
I'm just wondering, how many of these conditions have to be satisfied before it crosses
So the question is, how many of these conditions have to be satisfied before it crosses the line? Are you in engineering or something highly analytical? Yeah. The Revenue Canada is just not that specific. So they don't say, if you check 4 of these boxes, you are toast. They will make a judgment, based on the whole thing. Yeah.
I'm just thinking like scenario here. They don't work in our office. They don't use the computer.
Yes.
They do work full time. For periods of time, we might be their only client. Might be with us more than 1 year. We do invoice, and we do give them a going direction.
Congratulations, you have an employee. Yeah, at about that point. And there are things that you can do. So for instance, and you can't just do one of these, you're probably going to have to do several. But for instance, cross-charge them for use of the computer. Cross-charge them for use of office space. Ask them to invoice. Make sure they're charging you GST, even if that makes more. Don't put them on your benefits plan. Put your employees on your benefits plan, not your contractors. Keep them for 364 days, end their contract for a day, start them up again. You can actually do that. What else would I say? It helps out on this. No formal performance reviews. Other things that people have done, and it works with, again, it's not just one of these things, but they use third parties. The third party actually hires the employee and then charges you for it. Lots of organizations do that. It can't be the only thing that you do, though. Really, there have been many nasty cases of people who the company thought that what they hired was somebody from an agency, but after 8 years, the person said, I only work for you. I haven't talked to my agency. I talk to my agency once a year. Yes, please.
Does this become more of an issue when the employee or contractor brings that to Revenue Canada?
Oh, yeah. The company doesn't.
Yeah, no, but it's not as Revenue Canada goes out there because they will tell the employee that.
But
You know what? You may be crossing the line here. Or
Revenue Canada looks at their taxes, though. And that's where they get interested. Yeah, because what's happening is they're not remitting CP. Somebody isn't remitting CPP and EI on their behalf. So what they get is that, it's like, how come I'm not getting a T4 for this person who seems to be claiming, $200,000 of revenue from one client? How come I'm not getting a T4 for that? And if I'm not getting a T4, then I'm not getting CPP and EI. Revenue Canada is very interested in that. Revenue Canada is greedy, haven't you noticed? Please. If the employee is being paid through shares, you have an employee. They're going to say that form of payment is more likely to be an employment-like relationship as opposed to a contractor relationship. Now, would they do that just based on that one fact? Probably not, but that would lean them towards saying you have an employee. Yeah. Revenue Canada will use anything they can to get their bucks. Please.
So you started with somebody that both you and the person thought was contractors. You had this relationship, and then at some point you realized, well, hey, this is going to be off the run. That point is going to be like 6 months, 8 months. How do you fix something like that?
Before a year, it's more fixable, and you can still try it at any time. But if that happens, and I've seen that happen, where people say, okay, they've realized they have a problem, somebody who's become an employee, so that's where you try to do things differently. Have them not work at the office. Have them work out of their home. Ask them to provide their own computer. Those are a couple things you can do. Have them invoice you. Say, I'm not going to pay you anymore for this. I wouldn't do anything. You mean do something retroactively? And you mean with Revenue Canada? Totally up to you how generous you're feeling and how concerned you are about being detected. Yeah. 6 to 8 months is not bad.
What's the due diligence for employers? For example, you hire an agency that gives you this guy.
Yes.
Like, what are the steps that you should take to ensure that he is a contractor and not your employee?
Well, the deal is he's an employee of the agencies. So you hire him as a temporary employee. But you still need to do some due diligence. So again, do you have him there for 8 years? So if you have a temporary employee, Revenue Canada is going to say, what do you mean you have a temporary employee that's been there for 8 years? Well, that's not temporary anymore. And then you say, yeah, but they're hired through that guy. And then you say, and then Revenue Canada is going to say, are you doing performance reviews? And you say, well, yeah. Does he go to all your team meetings? Well, yeah. Does he go to the company dinner dance? Mm-hmm. You have an employee. Yeah. And then, now, somebody, his agency is already remitting CPP and EI and paying taxes, so that's not an issue. The issue is going to be severance or benefits. And that can include your retirement, pension plan, anything like that. If you don't have the, pension or benefits, it again is easier. But you really want to think about this carefully.
How far should the employer go? Like, in this situation, if the contractor might think it's usually for a company, it's better to have a contract.
Correct.
Now, the person's going to think, if in today's economic day, it's better to have a job than not have a job. So he wouldn't tell you these things. Like, he wouldn't tell you that he's only working for you.
Well, you will know because he's there 5 days a week. If he's there 5 days a week, you will know. Yeah. Now, if he's working a couple of days a week and then you haven't realized, oh, what you have is a full-time, part-time employee, which is still an employee, then that's when you want to say, do you have other clients? Can I see invoices for other clients? I need to make sure we're not having an employment-like relationship. I don't want an employee. And some people do want employees, by the way. Employees are usually cheaper than contractors from a base salary perspective. Contractors say, well, I'm not getting benefits, therefore I'm going to add 15%. And I'm not guaranteed employment here, so for that lack of stability, I'm going to add, We charge more even when we're working in a place, 5 days a week for a certain period of time. We charge more for that than an employee would. Somebody have a hand over here? Oh, yeah, please.
I just want to know about severance.
You want to know about severance?
If somebody has worked for 2 years on contract and 5 years on as employee, is that entirely required to have a severance for 2 years?
So the question is, if you worked for 2 years on contract and then 5 years as an employee, would you get 7 years worth of severance? Yes, if Revenue Canada deems that you're an employee, that person's an employee. So you owe them the severance for the whole period.
So who do you know each year how contracts are made from another country to another country? Nothing to do with Canada.
Well, that would be a way around it, yes. If you contract somebody from another country. Yeah. But then, of course, you have to go through the custom issues, yeah. Okay.
How would you confuse or deny the 2 years of contract as a
Well, so the question is, how could you deny the 2 years as a contractor for severance? Employers do it all the time. Employers, I'm not going to say with good judgment, but employers give severance that is inadequate, and that's why the courts are so busy with wrongful dismissal cases, which we will talk about at the end. Okay? All right, then move on. There you go. Hiring practices. So when you screen resumes, do use some basic criteria. When you're an entrepreneur, you're looking for something that I've noticed the biggest pitfall is entrepreneurs, really what you often need is big company best practices scaled down for startup. So ideally, you would have somebody who, they'd worked in a big company at least once or twice in their career, and they knew what best practices look like. They had, some blue chip or just some, large, practices. And they've also worked in a small company so that they know, for instance, there is nobody to fetch them their coffee. There's no IT department to fix things when they go wrong. They actually understand they have to do things themselves, and they know that best practices can often be too complex, and they do have to scale them down. So that's one of the criteria you can look at. I see more entrepreneurs saying, the guy was from Nortel. He should have been fabulous. Could not adjust to that, what it takes to be working in a small growth startup mode in an entrepreneurial fashion. You can screen people on the telephone. So the other thing I see entrepreneurs do is they interview everyone who applies, or too many people. And it's a big time, time is huge when you're an entrepreneur, and recruiting is a big time sucker. So look for ways to be more efficient. So, screen your resume so that you've got ABCs, only call your Cs, have a 15-minute phone screen, and then decide from the phone screens, am I then going to talk to somebody a little bit further in person. Okay, use behavioral interviewing. By the way, everyone says they use behavioral interviewing, but they actually don't know what they mean. So when you use behavioral interviewing, what you're doing is you're listening to their answers from a CAR model. Sometimes you may have heard it as a PAR or a STAR model. They're all the same thing. And the CAR model is, I got on the next page? Nope, not there. Okay, I'll go back. I'll go back and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then use some rigorous decision-making criteria to make the offer. Again, the biggest pitfall I hear in recruiting and hiring people from entrepreneurs is they use their gut instinct. Consider that your gut instinct is not all that good. And you will end up coming and calling us, and we will charge you exorbitant fees to help you figure out that your gut instinct is not all that good and to impose some rigorous decision-making criteria. And usually what gut instinct means is you liked the person. And what it really means is they were like you. They were similar to you, so they must be good. You actually might want people who are dissimilar, particularly if you're working in a small office. If you're not a detailed person, who's going to do that detail? If you're not the extrovert and the salesy person, who's going to do that? So you actually want to look for what is it that I need to complement me and our small, functioning organization. And I'm not saying hire people you dislike, but don't hire for your gut. Hire for criteria, even if they don't, end up being your best friend or your brother-in-law. Make the offer. You can do reference checks, background checks. You have to be careful if you're going to do. People often get very enthusiastic about, I'm going to do a criminal check. I'm going to do a finance check, and I'm going to do what's the other one? Credit check. First of all, you have to pay for all those things. And secondly, you can be accused of discrimination if they aren't job related. So if you're hiring a software developer, none of those things would be job related. So you need to be cautious about them. And then make an offer letter. And I usually recommend make an offer letter that's warm and welcoming and says, we're delighted to have you. Here's the salary. Here's the job. Here's the vacation. Attach a legal addendum with all of the legal stuff, but don't make it the actual offer letter. People tend to go legal when they get stuff like that. And then you're going to be spending all your time revising all of the clauses in it, as well as not starting off on a great foot. Okay, the principle behind behavioral interviewing is that the past is the best predictor of the future, certainly when it comes to hiring. So what you are looking for is what have people done in similar situations to the ones that you know that they're going to be in working for your organization. What have they done in the past? It's not, let's look at their past experience, and it's not, what would they do? And by the way, it's not that people lie. When you ask someone, gee, if you were in a difficult team and you weren't getting along with someone, what would you do? They actually think to themselves, what is the right thing to do? And they tell you what the right thing to do is. I would go and sit down with that person in that team. I'd have coffee with him or her, and I would discuss this openly. We'd have great communication, and then we'd come back and be productive on the team. They're not lying. It's just not what they've done in the past. And when you ask them, instead, what have you done in the past when, everybody has troubles on teams every once in a while, when you've had difficulty working with someone on team, what have you done? I asked someone this recently, and she said, I can't remember. I can't think of a thing. Okay, well, think about it a little bit more. And then she said, oh, I remember an example. I had them fired. This is for an HR person. Oh, good. Okay, well, there's an honest answer. People actually tell you the truth when you ask them what have they done, because they're trying to, access their memory banks instead of their what should I do banks. And their memory banks, they'll tell you the truth. So let's do a quiz here. Tell me about what you did in your job at the Arts Center. Is that behavioral, yes or no? Yes, if you think it's behavioral. No. It's a question about your experience. It's a tell me what you did. It's not asking about what they did in a specific situation that you want them to tell you about. What would you do if a team member stopped speaking to you? Behavioral, yes or no? No, it's not. It's a what would you do question. It's a hypothetical. How do you think you'd be able to help us with fundraising? Behavioral, yes or no? Are you getting better? No, it's not behavioral. Again, it's future-oriented. It's not the past. Now, you could turn that one into a behavioral question. You could actually turn all of them into behavioral questions. What would you do with this one? How do you think you'd be able to help us with fundraising? What would that, how could you make it into a behavioral question just really easily? Yeah, very good. So what did you do in the past to help with fundraising? Now, I'd probably say something like, in a difficult fundraising situation. Superlatives help here. You could say, tell me about the toughest fundraising situation you were ever in. Tell me about the most unique fundraising situation you were ever in. That can help people. Do you have any experience developing team programs? Can you tell me about that? Behavioral, yes or no? Nope, it could be though. What would make it behavioral? Little tweak. Go ahead. There you go. Exactly. Can you tell me about a time you developed a team program and what was?
And can you tell me about a difficult issue you uncovered?
Yeah, tell me about a difficult issue you uncovered. Absolutely. Can you give me an example of a time when you demonstrated leadership with people who didn't report directly to you? Behavioral, yes or no? Yes, it is. Okay, good. See, it's not that difficult. Now, people have told me that they have questions that they can't get to behaviorally. And I always say, well, what is it you want to find out? And I'm telling you, you can almost always get to it. I don't think I've ever been stumped by one. Doesn't mean you should only ask behavioral interview questions, but it should be the heart and the main pieces of the interview. So, of course, you're going to ask a couple of questions like, why are you leaving your current organization? What have you been doing? Why is it you have only 2 years with every company you've worked with? What's this big hole here? What are you looking for? Yes, you're going to ask those questions. I almost think of those as more icebreaker questions. And then there's these. That's what you really want to get focused on. Good for dating, too. The offer letter. So this is, I already said some things about this, so I'm not going to go over this. I'll leave this for you. Yes, the legal addendum. So in the technology world, you probably do want to have some kind of proprietary clause, proprietary information clause, technology, et cetera. That's going to be critical to you. And a non-solicitation clause, so they don't take your customers or your employees. Non-compete clauses. Here's the thing. I know a lot of people put non-compete clauses. How many of you have a contract yourself or an offer letter with a non-compete clause? I'm here to give you really good news. They're not enforceable in Ontario. So what Ontario courts have said, it's actually quite amusing. They said, yeah, absolutely, you can tell people that they are not allowed to compete in your field if they leave your company for 3 years. However, you'll have to pay them for the income that they're not able to make during that 3 years, so you'll have to give them 3 years' worth of severance. So they're kind of enforceable if you're willing to pay for it. And that's about all you can do. Actually, I should pause back there. Any questions about behavioral interviewing or the offer letter or hiring in general? Any questions about interviewing, hiring?
What's this non-solicitation clause?
It means you are not, if you, the employee, leave the company, whether I fire you, whether you quit, you are not allowed to solicit our clients or take our employees.
Have you seen examples where people will write into the offers or ways in which you can part ways? So like if somebody's coming to work on a new project, like, well, at this point, you might part ways.
Well, you're talking about termination clause.
Other than just the 2 weeks notice thing.
Yeah, I haven't seen it depend on what's happening in the organization. I'll tell you who tries to do it. It is probably analogous to what you guys might ever be interested in is the not-for-profit world, because they're so dependent on funding. And so they'll say, well, we might not get funding for that role. Therefore, shouldn't I be able to say, we don't have to give you severance pay because we didn't get the funding for that role to renew that role? And you know what? The Ontario government does not care. Employment legislation says we don't care why you had to fire somebody. We don't care that you didn't get funding, that your VC, financing fell through. We don't care. You have to pay them severance.
Have you ever seen people put terms for severance in the offer as well?
Yes, of course, absolutely. Here's the deal, though. So, and we'll get into severance, but I'm going to say it really simply right now. There's the Employment Standards Act, and then there's common law. So, for the Employment Standards Act, you have to pay the Employment Standards Act. You cannot you cannot write anything into the contract that says that you don't have to pay that, unless it's a union and they've negotiated something different in their collective agreement, okay? But for most people, you cannot rewrite the employment standards legislation into a contract. So that means that if you want people to sign something that says that they're not going to get common law severance, you have to give them a consideration. And a consideration is $1. It's to be at least $1. You could also do it for consideration of extra vacation. It has to be something considered to be a consideration. Considered to be a consideration. Yeah, because legally the court's going to say, well, you didn't give them anything, so that makes this contract null and void. So you have to give on something. All right? Did you have a question?
I was just wondering, where can you get some good examples of somebody as a new entrepreneur starting out? Is there a good example that this can pull off? Your idea?
Send me an email. I'll send you one. But there are probably some online. Yeah. And many people spend, lots of dollars with their lawyers, but they kind of all look alike. Yeah. And they don't have to be in legal language, by the way. If you're any lawyers here, you'll hiss at me for telling you that. But, an agreement is an agreement, whether or not a lawyer's looked at it and put it in a lot of legal language. As long as it's very, very clear. But we'll talk about severance in a couple of minutes, too. Okay, let me move along here. Okay. Motivating, rewarding employees. I'm going to tell you the biggest pitfall I see with entrepreneurs, they micromanage. And they micromanage, and now it's probably a big pitfall for any employer and boss, but the reason why it becomes more acute with entrepreneurs is this is their company. This is their money, it's their baby, it's their livelihood, it's their passion, it's their cause, it's their everything. They feel like that gives them a right to micromanage and that the employee will appreciate it. They do not, any more so than they would with anybody else. But it's really, really tough for entrepreneurs to let go. I have the same experience myself. There are certain things I just become, quite insanely attached to, that they have to look and go a certain way, and it's very difficult for me to empower my own people in a way that I found was easier for me when I worked in a corporation. So there's not much I can say about, don't micromanage. Is much easier said than done. And if you are not yet an entrepreneur and you plan to be, mark this space and say, remember my words when you see yourself doing it, and then figure out how you can not do it. And I have the rest of them I would say are basic precepts of managing people. And one of the things I have down here, so I don't really recommend too many management books because I'd rather you were, out selling your wares. But the one management book I think is useful for every manager to have on their shelf is 1,001 Ways to Reward Employees. You don't have to read the whole thing at once. It's a dip book. You can pick it up. It's good bathroom reading. Little paragraphs, short things. You can go into it, find something that you want, and get out really quickly. And then my final, don't expect a magic fix. Policy. So when you're first starting up, you're probably not going to have a policy guide. We still don't have one. You might want a slim one after 5 employees. You're probably not going to need one until about the 25 employee mark. And by the way, there's phase shifts in organizations. So they go from about 25 employees. You got a different organization than when you started out. 50 is different, 100, 250, 500, 1,000. And at about the 50 to 100 point, if you have big plans for growth and expansion, you're going to notice this, is that the family feeling that you started out with, that small, we're excited, we're all passionate, it is not there in the same way that it was before you were a 50-person company. Please.
Are there any occupational health and safety policies that you should start off with day one?
Only if you're working, if you have a biotech company and you actually, are doing work in a lab, absolutely. If you're doing software development, probably not so much. You don't have to worry about that so much. So that's, there's usually not very many policies in that area.
To jump back to what you were saying
Yep.
about rewards.
About?
About rewards.
Yes.
For employees. I've worked in a number of places where the employers rewarded their employees, beyond their regular compensation.
Yes.
With like gift certificates and stuff like that.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I have my personal opinion about that sort of thing. But I was just wondering if you had.
In general, I'm just going to say some principles. So first of all, I think that people don't distinguish between rewards and incentives. And I think those are two very different things. So a reward is you did something really great, and I want to make sure you know that I recognize it, I acknowledge it, and I want to give you a reward for it. I have seen a box of Smarties be a reward for a team because their manager noticed, okay? I have seen gift certificates, as you said, work out incredibly well. And I have seen, an organization where we were working on a project team, and the project team was, so busy, so intense. They sent flowers to all the spouses at home. So the reward wasn't even for the employee, but it was acknowledging, and the employees appreciated it. Said, yeah, because the person who's really suffering is my spouse, not me. So I've seen things like that. So I think you have to think about it. And that's very different from an incentive where you say, here's your commission, your incentive plan, your, might call it a bonus plan, whatever you do that says, if you achieve this, whatever this is, then I'm going to pay you differently. That's very different. Or I'm going to give you a vacation in Hawaii. That's still an incentive because you earned it by knowing what the target was in advance. So I just think that there's, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think you need to have a mix of both in many organizations. And I think people use incentives, monetary incentives, way too often and rewards way too seldom. Yes, because I actually don't think people, in general, people don't work for money. If they worked for money, I was going to say we'd all be investment bankers, but maybe not these days. But we would all be, plastic surgeons. We'd all go into, very high money things. And it's not that money's not important, but I don't think that's what they work for. And that's the mistake. And all the research says that. And, we still spend an inordinate amount of time helping, our clients build incentive plans that don't drive different behaviors. That's the fascinating part. Sometimes they do. I'd say for salespeople more than anybody else. But even then, it's not about the money, it's the number. A true salesperson, they're like, it's the number, it's the game. If you paid them in Smarties, they want to get more Smarties than anybody else. Yeah, it's just the nature. Please.
Is there a core set of policies that should go into a manual, and then should the second, should employees, contractors sign it?
Easy answer to both of them. So you can get I would say a table of contents in, I think earlier in the presentation when I had some of the free tools, one of them has, here's a policy set that you can use. And so you just, be able to go through and say, okay, I do need a vacation policy. I don't need a don't bring your gun here policy, which they have, everywhere in the US. So, and sign, yeah, I'd get all your employees and your contractors to sign. Absolutely. And any updates you make to the policies. And particularly, I would say in things like the sexual harassment, the other kinds of harassment, conflict of interest, any of your very legal policies, make sure they've read those carefully. Please.
I think the issue with your statement that software development does not need health and safety.
Okay. Say some more.
Just saying, big reason, help the tunnel.
Ah, got it. No, very good.
And it was not, no word on that very beginning. If you bring $700,000 a year to do something.
Fair enough. enough.
They can't work, they're screwed.
Yep. No, I think you're right. Absolutely. I would probably put something in for that then. Yeah. And I would say that more important than a policy would be some, ergonomic practices. Because then you could prevent ever having to pay out any of the. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Any other questions at this point? Okay. And you'll also know there are templates available for low prices, so it's not just a table of contents. In answer to your previous question, you can actually get one that's already written. But you know what? Go out, ask everyone you know. Have you got a policy you can send to me that I'm allowed to use, or adapt, etc.? Most people have something that you can attach to. And okay, I'm going to say one other thing about policy before we go there. Don't rewrite employment legislation. I often see, I have people tell me all the time, well, I wrote it in our policy, so we don't have to give severance at our company. Or we don't have to give emergency medical leave. I rewrote that. We don't give that holiday. We don't do overtime. All that. It's like, you know what? Again, the Ontario government does not appreciate you rewriting their legislation. So make sure that you actually understand the legislation before you write your own policy. You think I'm kidding, but I honestly see it all the time. Performance appraisal. So you may think that you're too small to have to do this. I started doing this when I had one employee. Have a process, even if it's just a very casual convo, but you say, we're going to do your performance appraisal, we're going to go for a run, we're going to have coffee, we're going to do it over a beer, but I'm going to tell you from a macro level what I think of your performance. And the reason why is it's not the same as I give my guy feedback, he knows that I love him, I'm telling him all the time what he's doing well. It's not the same as let's stand back and look at your performance holistically for the whole year and let me give you some macro crystallized feedback. Not the same. And I'm not talking about a piece of paper. And you may use a piece of paper, and there's lots of formats out there, and you can find them on the web, and again, you can borrow them from people. But it is it's a conversation. You will need a formalized process, by the way, when they start having people reporting to them. So probably at about 10 to 25 people is when you're going to need a more formalized process. Okay, now we're getting to firing people. We're getting close. So here's the number one principle: manage performance issues. And the biggest performance issue I see entrepreneurs not managing goes like this. We had this guy, he's a technical genius. He's rotten to everyone else in the company, but we can't do without him. So we're just going to let him be rotten, because if we say anything to him, he might quit, and we can't do without him. Sometimes it might be someone who, she's our best salesperson. Well, it might be that, but there's going to be something about we can't manage that person because we're dependent on them. Whereas in a bigger company, you don't find people do that, because they're like, yeah, nobody's that indispensable. So I would say number one principle: thou shalt manage performance issues. You will regret it if you don't. And a performance issue, it's any circumstance that originates with the employee. You'll notice I don't say it's the employee's fault. So for instance, a medical issue is a performance issue because it prevents them from successfully meeting their commitments to the organization or to the job. And then there's a whole bunch of things I've got down there that you include as performance issues. It doesn't mean it's their fault. For instance, some people are no longer able to do certain things. It could be, mental, medical. Some people they're not able to learn new skills. Again, not their fault. But it's still a performance issue, and you still need to manage it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. It's a very complex subject. But I will just say that you do need to manage it. The principles are respect and dignity for the employee. And when do you think is the toughest time to demonstrate respect and dignity? Always? Did somebody say always? When is it tough to show employees respect? I'd say there's two situations when it's really tough to show employees respect. What? What is it? Yeah, when you're going to fire them, but it's tough because they're incompetent or they're not doing what you want them to do. It's very tough when they're a performance problem. Here's the other time it's tough: when they're not being respectful to you. and it's still your job to show respect. No surprises. So lots of times, again, it's been building up for you, but you haven't actually said anything to the employee. And here's always the reason why people say they haven't said anything, because, well, I don't think that person isn't going to do anything about it. Maybe, but maybe not. And if you want to sleep well at night, you at least give them the chance. And maybe not a very long opportunity. Maybe you say, look, I need you to clean up your act within 2 weeks. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a long, involved process, and you just want to see some demonstration of willingness and effort and change in whatever area it is. But do give them an opportunity to make some effort to do something. You can start informally. You can get more formal. And you want to let at some point you want to say to people, if you can't change this, especially if it's theirs, and we're not talking about a medical issue, but at this point you're talking about, it's a performance issue they are completely in control of. If you can't change this, we really will have to terminate your employment. You can skip steps. You can have decision days. I love those. That's where you say, you know what? You really want to think about whether or not you want to work here. So take tomorrow off. Think about it. Don't give them a Friday or a Monday. Give them a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Take tomorrow off and think about whether or not you want to work here. And if you do, come back to me with a plan for how you're going to improve your performance. Any question about performance issues before we, yep?
Why not Monday to Friday?
Because you don't want to reward them by giving them a long weekend. Now, people will often tell you, by the way, oh, it's a reward anyway that they get a day off. You know what? It's the kind of reward. Remember when you were young and you were sent to your room and you had this, fine, I've got lots of things to do in my room. I got a TV, I've got a computer, I've got dolls or whatever you got, but still you knew you were being punished. And so it just wasn't as much fun. And maybe the first half hour it was fun, and then the second half hour was less fun, and the third half hour was really not fun. It's the same thing as giving people a decision day. It's not as much fun as it looks. Any other? I see lots of people were sent to their room when they were younger, because y'all recognize that one. Okay. So you've managed the person, and it's over. It's not working. Or, by the way, it's not their fault. It's not a performance issue. You don't have the funding. They don't fit in the job anymore. You don't have a need for a job. It's completely blameless, but for some reason you have decided to let them go. You'll notice again that the Employment Standards Act does not actually distinguish between reasons for letting people go that are their fault, your fault, etc. They're just like, they are agnostic about it. The person's no longer going to be working there. You need to give them employment standards. And here's where we get into the very, very interesting Ontario law of Employment Standards Act versus common law. And at some point you're going to say, yes, but how much severance are you supposed to give someone? And the only thing I can tell you is, well, it depends. So here's how it goes. Written down, Employment Standards Act says basically something like this, that there's a 8-week maximum for people who have worked less than 5 years at a company, that makes more than, I think it's $50 million. So for most people, certainly for most of your organizations that are smaller, between 1 week after 3 months of employment, so between 1 week and 8 weeks, you owe them 1 to 8 weeks of termination pay or severance. That's kind of what Employment Standards Act looks like. Simplified a little bit, but that's mostly what it looks like. And then there's common law. So common law is the body of employment law around constructive dismissal cases that has built up on a series of precedents in Ontario. So it's not black and white, it's not written down, there's no, it absolutely looks like this or that. And it's mostly dependent on how senior was the person. So if they were a senior person, it's going to be deemed that they are unlikely to be able to mitigate by finding another job quickly. The second issue is going to be how able are they to mitigate. So if you let somebody go who all they've got to their skill set is COBOL programming, they are probably less able to mitigate by getting another job, therefore more severance. How old are they? Are they over 40, over 50, over 60? courts will be very sympathetic toward that because, again, they know that there's age discrimination out there and that it's going to be harder for them to find a job. Are they handicapped in some way? Sometimes a consideration. Mostly, though, the courts base it on length of service. And I'm going to say this, it's just a rule of thumb. It's like 1 month per year of service, up to about a cap of 24 months. But that's 2 years of severance. Now, you can do you can do the whole thing in notice if you want. And by the way, that also includes their bonus and their benefits for that period of time. But if you have a 5-year employee, if they took you to court, they could probably get 5 to 6 months. So if you're giving somebody severance, and that's quite a bit different than 5 weeks from Employment Standards Act. 5 months is much more different. So what you would probably want to do is either pay the 5 months or take your risk with 5 weeks. By the way, if you even pay them $1 more, you can get them sign a waiver saying they won't take you to court. You have to pay the Employment Standards Act. You don't have a choice about that. And they can get that back from you very easily. But if you decide, okay, what if I do this? I'll pay them 3 months and see if they will sign for consideration because they don't want to spend the time and the energy taking you to court. You can do that. That's often the way people do it. Please.
Would that include stock options that are invested over time? Do you do that in that sense?
Depends on the vesting plan.
Should you write a vesting plan? Should you not include
Yeah,
that?
you do. Depends on the vesting plan, and you usually say something about that. Yes. So back to the question of contract. So if you have somebody who was on contract for 2 years, doing the same work, and then they evolved into an employee for 5 years, that's 7 years severance. 7 months severance. 7 months severance. Okay. I'm going to. The only time that you don't have to pay severance is if it was for just cause. So in other words, mostly what this means is they did something illegal. They sexually harassed someone, they punched someone, they stole from you. I would say if it was a severe safety infraction or a severe infraction of your policies, like maybe they hacked into your system. You might have a policy that says they can't do that. So it has to be really severe before you can fire them without severance. Here's the thing, Ontario courts do not believe that non-performance is just cause. Not showing up to work is just cause. So people who are just, they just didn't show up, you can fire them for never showing up, but not because they're not performing the job the way you like it. Ontario courts realize it is highly subjective, and they just say, you need to pay them severance. That's mostly how it works. And the burden of proof is on you as the employer, not on the employee. And these are some of the examples of just cause that I mentioned. We talked about these. Oh, by the way, Human Rights Commission. So people cannot waive their Human Rights Commission. They cannot waive their human rights. So they can say, yes, pay me that severance and I won't take you to court for wrongful dismissal, but then I could turn around and take you to court for human rights. And these days under the human rights process, they are guaranteed a hearing. If you have to go through that hearing, it's probably going to cost you about $15,000 just to go through the hearing. Better to negotiate your way out. Now, as I often point out, though, mostly what happens at the other end, if they win, they get reinstated. If they don't want the job, I often point this out to people. They say, should I take my employer to human rights? I said, do you want your job back? And they say, God, no, I hate them. Why do you want to take them there? Because that's mostly what's going to happen. They might impose punitive fines on the employer. They might impose mandatory training, things like that. But mostly it's going to be, you get your job back. Prepare the final check. Choose a quiet place. Don't go to Starbucks. Bring some Kleenex. The meeting at this point is short and bitter. It is not a time to discuss why you're terminating the employee. Presumably you've already had that discussion. Tell them, you know what, we're going to make the best of it without you, and you want to talk next week, give me a call. By then, they actually don't usually want to talk. But if they do, you can do that too. Decide what your communication plan is to the rest of your staff, and it looks like that. Final questions, and then we'll let you go home. Okay, yes?
So, well, it'd be nice to have to start out to make it up to 7 years and all that, but what about if you're just in the first year and the second year and you have employees, people that you hired and you need to get rid of? What are the
Well, for somebody who's 1 year, you can, now the courts usually do a minimum of, I would say, 3 months common law, but you can probably cut a deal with them. I'll give you 2 weeks, because they would only be, they'd only get 1 week at 1 year anyway, from Employment Standards Act.
And if I could ask you a second.
Sure.
For that small startup, I know you've done elsewhere by hiring themselves. What would the typical hire look like for this?
The first 10 people?
Yeah.
One of those people is going to be a salesperson.
Is that?
One of them is going to be a salesperson, because if you're not selling, then, and by the way, that sounds like the statement of the obvious, but a lot of people hire another technology person. I've seen startups that have nobody who's interested or good at sales in them. And then you've got this beautiful new piece of biotech that nobody buys because you've got no one selling it. HR is going to be 50 to 100, somewhere around there. It depends on which services. And outsourcing, you're talking about that kind of thing? Yeah, it depends. I mean, obviously a lot of technology people are outsourcing offshore, other things like that. It really depends on what your strategy is. Oh, immediately. Immediately. So you're probably, we only brought our bookkeeping in-house recently, but our accounting is still outside. Yeah. So it's going to depend on your priorities and how much you're willing to spend. And do you think you can get better help by going outside? Sorry, so what's your question? Yes. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good question. If you're paying somebody in shares, I honestly don't know. I'd be interested in seeing if there was any precedence for that. I'd look online and see if you can find anything on that one. Yes?
What you've seen for a technology company, what would be a good salesperson?
A good salesperson? Somebody who's passionate about whatever it is that you're selling.
Like they understand technology?
No, they don't have to understand it. They have to be passionate about it. It's your job to understand it. Usually the entrepreneur who started it up is the one who understands it. They have to be passionate about it. They have to think that what you're doing is a great thing.
So them understanding technology itself isn't that important?
No. They're going to learn what they need to learn, and they're going to drag you in, to any of your pitches. Yeah. But they are passionate. Obviously a Rolodex helps, but I'm more interested in somebody who's going to be willing to knock on any door. You need a thick skin for sales. Yeah. Please.
As a startup, how do you compete for talent? Every company wants top-notch people, but as a startup with limited need for salary and benefits, do you have any tips on it?
Well, you've got equity, and they can't get that in many other places, so that's unique. You've also got flexibility for work arrangements. People can work at home. They can come in at 10 o'clock. You've got that unique kind of work condition. You actually want to sell that as part of, this is what you get when you work here.
Do you want to put that on the job description?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you want to put any kind of technology that you are going to provide them with in the job description. Even if it's as simple as, we're going to give you an iPhone. You would not believe that will double the number of applications you get. I'm not kidding. It sounds ridiculous, but yeah, absolutely. Somebody. Yes? You're obsessed with termination. Is there something happening that we should know about?
Well, with the level with the crisis, there were so many layoffs.
Yes.
So many terminations.
Yes.
So how long?
If you are in any kind of situation where you're in a layoff, get a lawyer to look at, before you sign a thing, get them to look at the termination clause. Not the clause, the termination letter. You get a lawyer to look at it. Absolutely. They'll give you all kinds of good advice for, you're going to have to make a $500 investment probably to get an employment lawyer to look at it. But yeah. Please? Benefits are not required, and very few startups offer benefits. There may be some informal ones. You can offer a lot more vacation. That's another part of being in a startup. So offer more vacation. It doesn't cost you anything. I mean, there's an opportunity cost to it, but yeah.
You mentioned before that you put up a slide that includes resources.
Yes,
You just put that.
you can. Who else had a question here while I do this? There we go. Yes. Hiring. Yes. Yes. Well, yeah, and you're going to have expenses for all kinds of professional services because you are going to outsource your accounting and your cleaner and maybe your IT, et cetera, and that's just going to be another, it's an employee expense. Yeah. Well, the legal consequences are not going to be about employment insurance, and they're not going to be about CPP. They're going to be about, did you hire somebody legally within the framework of, our customs and, all of those kinds of things. Yep. Somebody else had a question? Okay, then I should let you go. If you have anything else you want to ask me individually, please feel free. Enjoy the rest of your program. Good luck with the contest. How many people are entering it? That's it? Only the 2 of you? 3 of you entering the contest? Okay. Well, then good luck. It's great. Okay. Enjoy. Thank you.